Okay, from our studios this week in Los Angeles and Tampa, this is Green Tag, the theme park in 30. I'm Philip. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host Scott Swenson of Scott Swenson Creative Development. On Green Tag, we break down the top theme park news for each week and explain why it matters to professionals. And this week, we're going to talk about the Herschend finalizing its acquisition. Exciting.
Woo! I don't know why I made that sound. That's not a Herschend sound at all.
I don't know. Well, gosh.
It was Herschend hands. Those are kind of like jazz hands. I don't know.
Okay. So just a little bit recap. We did talk about this news when it was first announced, but it's now been officially completed. And Herschend has officially completed its acquisition of Palace Entertainment's 24 U.S. attractions, solidifying plans first shared in March. As of today, the recording previously this week, Herschend operates 49 properties with 22,000 hosts serving nearly 20 million guests annually. This milestone moment also coincides with Herschend's 75th anniversary, two defining moments that underscore Herschend's commitment to innovation and strategic growth, aligning with its purpose of bringing families closer together by creating memories worth repeating. Trademark. So they did mention
that sentence, Philip. That would have been a tough one for you.
I know.
Sentences worth repeating. Anyway, sorry,
memories worth repeating. Okay. The press release says this season will be all about listening, learning, and building relationships. Guests can expect the same familiar attractions and hospitality they've come to know and love. Herschend's current focus is supporting its hosts and empowering them to deliver exceptional guest experiences. So yet again, they're underscoring that nothing is going to change, which we talked about last time, but is important because some of the brands have very different approaches to specific things. Like to me, I always think, of course, about Halloween, and like some of the brands are family friendly only and some are spooky. And I think they're emphasizing nothing's going to change this year, so don't freak out. And this is a more long-term strategy versus, just a long-term strategy so they can figure out what to do, basically.
I also think it's important to recognize that many of the Palace Entertainment parks are operating as, from a guest-facing standpoint, they appear to be quote-unquote independent parks or family parks,
yep.
Or parks that have been around for quite some time, which have a great deal of tradition. So it makes sense that they're not going to come in and just say, yes, we're gonna whitewash everything with Dollywood or whatever their big brands are, which I think is Dollywood. But Herschend though has an interesting history though in the fact that they have a similar approach. They have a lot of different things, because when we say Herschend, if you're not in the industry, people would go, who? They may think of Dollywood. They may think of one or two of the larger properties, but they wouldn't think of Herschend as a key player, certainly, or recognize them by name. Nor would they have recognized Palace Entertainment by name. Mm-hmm. They recognize Six Flags, Disney, Universal, maybe SeaWorld, probably not as United Parks and Resorts yet, but they recognize big players by the names that the big players have put forward. Herschend has not really done that, so it seems like a pretty good match to be able to operate a bunch. Like, for example, I mean, this is a weird analogy, but there, not too far from us, I was just walking the dog, and not too far from us, there is a ghost kitchen. Now, a ghost kitchen is basically a depot for DoorDash and Uber Eats to pick up from. These restaurants that they're picking up from do not exist. They only exist. They're all part of a company called Ghost Brands. And so if you order from a place called Matty Melts. Matty Melts is a grilled cheese place that only delivers. There is no Matty Melts restaurant. It's just this ghost kitchen. So they come and pick it up. They've got a logo. They've got the whole nine there. Well, that's kind of what Herschend has done. They've been the operator. They've been the owner of all of these different brands, these different parks that have a different guest-facing approach. And so has Palace. So it kind of makes sense. I mean, if Palace was going to be purchased, if the U.S. parks that Palace had were going to be purchased by someone, Herschend seems to be like a really good choice.
I agree. And I also think that it helps them secure a position kind of in this consolidation of the top brands that we're seeing? I mean, you listed all of them, but basically that puts them up there, maybe in a close third or fourth when compared to United Parks, right? So it kind of their overall attendance. I think the biggest challenge is the integration, but as you just said, right, like it's the fit in terms of the fit wise, like it fits in that all of these were celebrated as local places, local parks, and local things, and that's what they're good at. The financially, there's a big challenge too. It's a $1.1 billion leveraged loan, and it kind of triggered an S&P downgrade in their credit rating to B plus, which basically just means that the near term leverage is high, as in like they've leveraged assets pretty high up, so the leverage ratio is pretty high. And right now, since they haven't really put out a strategic plan or any sort of, they're listening this year, for which is good, but in the short term, the big risks are like you've increased the debt that you owe, and your attendance and your revenue is not necessarily increasing. So you've taken on more debt, but not necessarily any more attendance or revenue. And because there's no plan, that's why it's been downgraded. But we assume that next year they will release a plan in the way that Six Flags did after a while, and they'll adjust projections, or they'll say, this is how we're going to increase attendance or do this or that. Or because they're family owned, maybe they won't. Like, that's the other side of this, is maybe they're just going to say, we're going to focus on making each one local and keep the local presidents in place, unlike Six Flags, getting rid of all of them, and just kind of make sure that each park independently can be profitable, and we will slowly pay back this thing. That could also be an approach.
Yeah, it's funny because I almost hope that is the approach.
Yeah,
I almost hope that these more regional parks. I mean, that's what the vast majority of them are. Like Lake Compounce, for example. That's a former Palace Park, which is now a Herschend Park. It started as a trolley stop park. They were the only local game in town, really, and they had a unique way of approaching it. So I'm hoping that we can maintain some of that charm, some of that historical content, and some of that unique way of doing business, because I think that will make a more diverse product for them. Let me put it this way: if I were going to say, okay, if Herschend all of a sudden came and said, "Hey, Scott, run our conglomerate for me, would you?" I don't think they would, so I'm really not holding my breath. But and if they did, probably shouldn't. But if they were to come to me, I'd say, yeah, let's see how much we can maintain of the individual uniqueness and charm of each park, while giving it a much stronger position within the world, so that they can have we can give them ordering leverage, we can give them supply leverage. Yeah. It's how can we make them still unique to the guest with a much stronger support team from behind.
Yep. Well, like you said, there are, I think you're saying too, there's also synergy. Like, it's that balance between there are synergy possibilities where, like you're saying, with the consolidated hiring, leveraged buying, all that kind of stuff. But there's also synergy in that they have a portfolio, and they have things that are not just the parks. I mean, it's a wider portfolio. They have the Globetrotters, they have the festivals that they differentiate, all of that. So it's possible too that there's some thing that they could incorporate. They have IPs, they have access to
IPs, and they have, and to homogenize all of those IPs under one name may or may not be beneficial at this point, because again, no one says, hey, they'll say, let's go to Disney. They won't say, hey, let's go to Herschend.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to maintain those IPs, maintain the integrity of some of those parks. It's the same reason that when Busch Entertainment Corporation, even though at the time the Busch Gardens parks were the juggernauts of the system, they chose the SeaWorld name because SeaWorld was better known. It was more immediately recognized. And now it's like I'm guessing, but it's like United Parks has kind of gone the opposite, to try to make the corporate umbrella less important and the multiple brands of the parks more important. So it provides more variety to the guests, and again, diversifies their portfolio.
Yep. Well, it seems Was there anything else? Let's see. I think that we talked about, the seasonal stuff could be an issue later, but maybe not. I mean, if they're going to end up keeping each thing individually, you could see where they would just say that these parks have always done scary, so we're going to let them continue to do scary.
Well, and we all know that Herschend, well, not everybody, I guess, but most people in the industry know that Herschend is incredibly family friendly based on the religious background and
Yeah.
the morality background of the
Yeah, we
park.
talked about that last time. Yeah.
I just want to, that's the only thing that I think might be a little bit of a hiccup for some of the adult stuff. But
Yep.
again, I guess it depends on the sensitivity of what is too much.
Yep. Yep.
Even when I do adult stuff, I don't go anti-religion. So, but that's my own personal cross to bear, so to speak. No, that's my own personal approach. So we'll see.
There are the part of this acquisition does include some smaller water parks and FECs, and there are some people, some analysts that are thinking that they might close those or leave those out. But I think that's the same thing we see with Six Flags or just any. You have to analyze to see if they think they can keep the asset profitable or whatnot. That's to be determined. In the future, I think for these.
Right, and in order to have that sort of unified buying power, you have to evaluate and see, what are the parameters? Do the parameters go from, a mile to 3/4 of a mile? Is that the world we're living in, to make it so that you can have that buying power?
Yeah.
Who
Well,
knows?
let's go. I want to transition over to the next story, which is, I think, directly related in that it creates a great contrast. So last week, after we did our analysis about Six Flags, then a few days after, they announced that they're removing all their park presidents. So they've chosen to do a new regional management model where, so effectively, we talked about this in the past a little bit, where they first experimented with this with their PR teams. So like one PR team was managing media relations for several theme parks in a region. And now they're doing the same thing with their park presidents. So like one park president, they're going to have just one president. It's going to manage multiple, like whole regions, right? And I think there's been a lot of pushback about this as usual, but it is interesting because I think the best criticisms I've seen have pointed out that this is fundamentally different in that, like, having someone that's accountable for the park, like the buck stops here in an individual park, is pretty critical to any company. And you can, it's kind of like you can share lower roles, but can you really share the president role for the area? And then I think the best quote I'm going to read here from a forum that was from the Theme Park Insider article, and here's like the best quote I thought was, "These are theme parks we're talking about, not Chipotle locations. Each one has a different departments of employees and thousands of people. How can you operate a theme park and adjacent water parks for most parks without having someone directly responsible for it?" Which I think is a great encapsulation of the whole challenge. So yeah, Scott, is this Chipotle or is it a theme park? And what's the difference?
So it's interesting. When I first heard this, I had the exact same response. However, as I've let it sink in, and kind of looked at it, tried to look at it from a more open point of view, I'm questioning, and I'm not 100% convinced yet. But if there is no buck stops here president, there is a regional manager who is the buck stops here regional manager. Will this not encourage those people who are the vice president of culinary, the vice president of merchandise, the vice president of operations? Will it not force them to work together more? Will this break down silos, which is, in my opinion, one of the first earmarks of, hey, this park's in trouble, is when their silos get too strong, and it doesn't become what's good for the park; it becomes what's good for the culinary bottom line, or the merchandise bottom line, or the operational budget, or whatever. So will this break down some of those walls between departments? And I don't know whether it will or not, but I know that if I were working in a park and I were the vice president of entertainment, and all of a sudden there was no chief on grounds we now had to report directly to, in essence, corporate, I would be going to my peers in the park and making friends real fast. I would also be going to my peers in the region and making friends real fast.
Mm,
So um, I think there's a possibility, and I don't know this for sure, but there's a possibility that this could help eliminate some of the silo situation, help eliminate some of the one department fighting another. And this doesn't mean anything unless you've worked in a theme park. But once you've worked in a theme park, you're going to go, oh, everybody has silos? Yes, every park has silos. Doesn't matter how big, doesn't matter
yeah.
how small, doesn't matter whether you're a theme park, a zoo, a museum, any large attraction that has multiple departments, there are silos. And some of them have very thick walls that you never know what the other one's doing. And some of them are pretty good about talking to one another. But when you don't have a buck stops here who can take all the blame, then all of a sudden you got to work together. It's sort of like if you've got, you got 3 kids who are being babysat by the same person, the babysitter gets up and leaves. Those kids have to be resourceful. They have to find a
Yeah.
way to keep going. So I'm curious to see if this is going to happen. I'm not saying it will happen, but I'm saying it is a possibility. And I'm saying, if I were involved here, I would immediately break down all those walls if they hadn't been broken down already and say, gosh, guys, we can't hide behind our park president anymore. Our work is going to be completely transparent to the next level up. And so there's a possibility that it may change the way the parks operate, and it may make them operate more efficiently.
Yeah. I really like this idea, and I hadn't thought about it in that lens, but I really like it because I'm just thinking about that as you're saying it. So you're in this department, you're needing to work to each other, because then it becomes, well, we want to do this thing for Halloween. We have to all work together to pitch it to the
Correct.
regional person,
Correct.
because and I think it
And
also
we
the
at the
regional
park
person.
all have to be on the same page
Yeah, we all have to be
before
on
we
the same
pitch
page
it to regional boss.
to get the budget. Yeah, to do the
And
thing.
more accurately, we in the region have to all be on the same page.
Yeah, that's what I like about it too. I like having you have like one person who sees everything from their whole parks and their whole jurisdiction, and they're able to make a decision that's not just for one. Like it's you're balancing multiple things, and then to your point, if the people on the ground, like the merchandise person at this park, is having to go and argue directly to the regional person, then it might give the regional person much more visibility on the day-to-day working. So it will almost like shorten the strategy window where you're not having a whole layer you have to go through.
And after they get over the initial shock of the change, they're going to become much more comfortable with their regionals so that they will not feel as though they have to hide information from them. And the only reason I say that is back 1,000 years ago when I was working retail, I worked for a major department store, and the major department store chain had a regional. It had It had a store general manager, but then also had a regional manager. And it just happened that the regional manager's office was in our store.
Mm.
So we were very comfortable with the regional manager. We saw him all the time. We would say hi. He would ask us a question. We would give a straight, honest answer. We were empowered by our store manager not to fib to him, to be straightforward, to be honest, because we didn't have anything to hide. And I think just by the nature of hierarchy, when you eliminate that level, it will put the regional manager much more in control and have a much more realistic understanding of what's going on in the region.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's really, I feel like that's very similar to what even 13th Floor does, which is a totally random example. But I just think even there you see it where it's like they have the regional director and then even on the entertainment front, it allows them to coordinate entertainment across a whole region.
Sure.
Especially when they have multiple shows in one metro area, even you need to be able to coordinate resources, coordinate the shows, theming.
That's another thing I was thinking of too is, say, for example, Philip, you and I are both vice presidents of entertainment in 2 parks in the same region. And we are both sharing our information with our regional head. And he says, hey, you know what? Philip's doing something really cool. that he's found a great vendor. Maybe you want to tap into that because he's already found it. It's already working well for him, and we might be able to get a price break if we can get you both buying the same thing.
Yeah. 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 And then also staffing, being able to even potentially share staffing strategies, share your recruitment ideas, and
Sharing staff. I mean, I know that sounds crazy,
yeah, but you could
but
do it.
you could do it. I mean,
Yeah.
there's restaurants have done it. Restaurants with chains have done it for years,
Yeah.
where they would, after you get to a certain level, having been with the company for a certain number of
They'd
years,
have you go shadow. Yeah.
you can go shadow another location, or they can even call and say, and retail establishments do this too. They can call and say, "Hey, I've had my assistant manager is out on maternity leave, and I've had 5 call-ins today. Can you send somebody over here?" And basically, if it's someone to come over and run a register, they can do it,
Yeah.
and they pay mileage and they ship you over to another store. So that would handle. Although I know staffing is getting better, but that would handle some of the staffing challenges if they, rear their ugly heads again.
Yep. Well, it's not just that. It's also the idea of like you produce a show. You make a show. You could potentially move the show over if you needed to. To fill up something, or there's a weather thing over here. You could redeploy. Yeah, it's a lot. That's interesting. I really like this idea because even when I was talking to the different entertainment teams at the different Universals, and there's not even that many Universals really. I mean, not compared to 42 parks, I mean, there's only so many, and there's only 2 in the US. And what shocked me even then was about
there's 4 in Florida.
Yeah, of course. God. But how they just didn't talk to each other at all. And even when it came down to the Halloween people, and they would ask me, like back when we were doing the magazine, to send them versions of the magazine so they could like look at what the costumes looked like for this show that this person did, because they didn't know. And I was like, can't you just call the costumer at Universal that you need to talk to? And because you both work for the same company, and they're like, doesn't work like that. You can't talk to people at the other places. And you're like, that's
exactly
crazy.
It breaks down those walls. It breaks down those silos. And if the business model is let's make it so that they're gonna own the regional park. Say Six Flags' goal is to own the regional park market, not to be the destination location, but to be the location, to be more of the fast food than the once a year high end restaurant. Then making sure that the quality is comparable with throughout the region is going to benefit that model.
Yeah.
And it's going to benefit that model because, I was telling Philip just before we started recording that later this month, my husband and I are going to the Chicagoland area, and I'm going to visit Great America, which I grew up going to. And when I bought a season pass to go, they gave me all of the information on buying passes and the upgrades to go to all the other Six Flags parks, which is, really, really cool. And if they're going to do, Philip had mentioned the possibility of maybe doing a regional version, which I think would be really smart. If that does indeed happen, then this makes an awful lot of sense. It's scary as hell right now, and it seems counterintuitive. And quite honestly, to all those people who have, lost their positions, my heart goes out to you. Trust me, I've been there. I understand. Cameron, I'm going to say it again. Don't panic, just pivot. One of our listeners loves it when I say that because he has it posted in his office. But don't panic, just pivot. And you've got a great deal of skills, and you can continue to work because there's, plenty of theme parks in the country right now, and now only a few companies to work for to to make that happen. So it makes your job search a lot easier.
Well, I guess my question, do you think that they're going for like what we talked about with Herschend, where it's like they're trying to make each park have its own distinct like family brand, or are they going for more of a Chipotle-esque model where you can expect certain like quality standards across like every Six Flags name?
I can't speak knowledgeably about that. I can give you hypothetical and how I would approach it if it were my choice. Because the parks in some regions, the parks are not far away. They're very close to one another.
Yeah, like here, Six Flags and Knott's.
And Knott's. I would make sure that the regional parks maintain their own individual qualities, but I would make sure that the experience that you had at, and you've said it yourself, Magic Mountain, the experience at Magic Mountain and the experience at Knott's are very, very different. And I would make certain that you felt just as comfortable going to Magic Mountain as you would going to Knott's, that the restrooms were all clean, that the security made you feel safe, that the rides were all properly updated and maintained, properly operated, all that kind of stuff, so that guests will feel comfortable. I mean, if you think about it, it's not that different from Walt Disney World, only it's a regional approach. Instead of everything being in one place where you have to go to a hotel and spend money on a hotel, you go back to your house. And then you go off in this direction to another park. And then you go back to your house. And 2 days later, you go off to another park. And you know that when you're in the mood, you can get a variety of experiences, but all the money goes to the same company.
Mm.
So that's what, if I were a regional manager, that's what I would try to do, is to make certain that all of the parks didn't duplicate, but complemented each other.
Mm.
Because again, if you look at just the hard goods, the hard assets of Magic Mountain and the hard assets of Knott's, they're very different. Yeah. They're very, very different. And the vibe of both of those parks is very different. I would try to enhance that difference while once again giving that regional buying power.
Yeah, and a regional person instead of a park
Making
president
decisions.
model could do that, because the regional person then is making that, they're responsible for all of them, so they can more, enhance and balance. And versus if they were park presidents, they wouldn't know the information to be siloed, but then also the park presidents would be like, well, it's like too focused on just one, I guess, versus like balancing a region.
And there's also that human nature thing. Park presidents, if you have a park president with 2 parks in the same region, they're going to be competitive with each other.
Yep.
A regional will not. They will be supportive of each other, because the success of their region is more important than the success of any individual park. Yeah.
Yep.
And again, this is all, I just want to really, really clarify, this is all hypothetical, because I don't know whether this is the plan or not. I don't know whether it would work. But since we're having this discussion, we've said for many, many years, we start with the facts, but the idea is we want to make sure that people are talking and asking the right questions. And this is just a possibility. And I think that it's a viable one. The more I talk about it, the more we chat about it, the more interesting it sounds to me. But you're right, Philip. As you said at the very beginning of this segment, it's a different approach.
Yep,
it's a very different approach, and because it's very different, it's scary and seems either unique or crazy. But once again, going back to one of my dearest mentors, she used to look at me and go, "First, break all the rules. Go back and blow something up." Another one of my mentors would use the phrase, you'd look at him and you go, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." And his response is, "If it ain't broke, break it and rebuild it," because that's how you make it better. Just getting by is the best way to stop progress. If you have a modicum of success, if you're moderately successful, you're never going to get better, because you're going to go, "Hey, we're successful. We're good. We're good." So this is a unique approach, and I'm curious to see how it's going to pan out. I hope. I mean, obviously, it's for the industry, so I hope it does well. And those of you who have been directly affected by this, I'm sorry. I know how it hurts. Believe me, I know on a personal level how it hurts. But at the same time, it is doing the same thing to you. It is opening you up to new possibilities. And in my particular case, had it not happened, had I not been restructured away, which is exactly what's happening here, recognize first you didn't do anything wrong. This was not your fault. This is a restructuring for the betterment of the company. And if you get restructured to another part of the company, dive in with the same fervor that you did before. And if you move on to a different company, dive in with the same fervor, because your experience is valuable. So just something that's important to remember, because this does impact people. And I don't want people to contact us later and say, "How heartless can you be to say it's okay to get rid of all of these jobs?" It's hard. It's a hard pill
Well, I
to
think
swallow.
that's exactly from what I read online, that was mostly what everybody was saying. But I think, you can, like you said, take a step back, and I would also argue. I mean, I know this is also terrible, and people are gonna, but I would say the people that are park presidents of those parks probably are pretty high skilled individuals
Of course
who
they are. They wouldn't be where
can.
they are if they're not.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's also the thing too. But yeah, we're at time, and I think on our Patreon show after this, which you can find by just going to Patreon and searching Green Tagged, or just looking at the link in our show notes, we're going to be discussing a little bit more what's going on. And then next week we're going to talk about trends.
Great. Yeah. Because there's been a lot of trends in the industry, and we do this every now and then. We kind of do like taking the pulse of the industry. And so we hope you've enjoyed this week. I know I have. This has been a good show for me. I like this. But we hope you've enjoyed it as well. And we also hope to see you all next week here on Green Tagged Theme Park in 30.